Spider-Man, Spider-Man does whatever a dang long movie can. Spider-Man No Way Home. This is a hard movie to talk about without spoilers. I won't get into them right away. I'll give you a couple of my general thoughts before we get into it. And as many things as I think I can get away with being more or less spoiler free, I'll warn you of the gradation of spoiler we're dealing with as I move forward. So, first thing, it is very good. Definitely, for me at least, a heck of a lot better than Far From Home. I didn't like Far From Home that much. It wasn't bad, but like I liked Homecoming so much better. This is way better than Far From Home was. So this is a good round out. There's always the possibility we could get more. Tom Holland could come back, but it's been, and this isn't even a spoiler to talk about this, it's been made clear in discussions with Amy Pascal over at Sony and some other things that like they'd like to have him continue, but as far as his contract currently goes, unless it's re-upped and renegotiated, this might be all we get out of the Tom Holland Spider-Man. And if it is, it's a solid trilogy. And I say that not liking the second one as much, but like it started strong and it ends strong. I am going to talk a little bit about some of the stuff that is involved with the premise. Nothing I am about to talk about it is a surprise to anyone who's seen the trailers. So that's the level of spoiler I'm going to start dealing with now that I've just established that it's good. That's your totally spoiler-free review. Go see it if you need to. So, sticking to what we saw in the trailers and those premises. It's interesting this picks up immediately on the back end of Far From Home and dealing right away with the consequences of Peter's identity being revealed. And I really like the way those consequences are played out. Now, you could say in some ways that they gloss over some things because it's established relatively early on that, like, no, he's not actually going to be tried for murder or things like that. You might think, oh, are these really lasting consequences? But the consequences that matter are the consequences to his social standing, to MJ, to Ned. So what this does really well in its opening section, it really emphasizes exactly not only how much this impacted him, but how persistent and omnipresent the impact of that is. Let me put it another way. Based on the trailer alone, when I saw that Peter was going to have Doctor Strange try and put together a spell for him to fix his problems, that struck me as like, Peter, come on, that's a bad idea. But honestly, this was able to give context for like, okay, I get why he thought that was a good idea. I get why he was pushed far enough that he was prepared to go, you know what? Maybe this will work. Because can something work? So yeah, I get it. It's one of those things that really emphasizes that while I always argue it is fair to make judgments based off a trailer. Trailers exist to be judged, that you don't have full context. And sometimes the additional context of the final film can make something that made you go a little in the trailer suddenly work because it's now got all the surrounding material that sells it in a way the trailer couldn't. So I like all that. All the performances are good. Everybody's solid. I'm not even going to go through actors because some of that is spoilers. Okay, so the ones we know are here. Tom Holland does real good work. I really do love Zendaya as MJ. And like the chemistry that she and Holland have is just gold. Fantastic. Ned's great. May's great. Happy. He's performed well. I don't love that he's a little bit of a sad sack. This movie, but like also I get it. It's not like it's out of character. It makes sense for him, all things considered. So that was all good. Benedict Cumberbatch, Doctor Strange. I was a little bit worried. Like in general, I like Doctor Strange and Spider-Man working together, broadly speaking. But I don't know. I had kind of feared that there was going to be something just a little bit off about his inclusion here, but it's handled really well. The scenes he has with Peter, again, like little moments that seemed off in the trailer now work with full context with the complete scenes playing out. Yeah, it's good. It's kind of all I can talk about before getting into what I would consider legitimate spoilers for this movie. This is your final warning. I'm not going to give you another one. Still here? All right, here we go. Wow, where do we even begin? Normally, I don't get too hung up on the logistics of a big idea like this. Like, I want it to make sense internally. That's really all I ask about any bonkers premise, be it magical or sci-fi based. If you're going with an outlandish premise, I can suspend a lot of my disbelief and I can go with a lot of stuff as long as it is consistent internally within the film or show or extended universe itself. You have to obey your own rules. I don't really need a ton of continuity stuff or like, ooh, and here's this to be sure that we cover this and explains this. I don't need that kind of thing. That said, when it's done well, I will recognize that. And the way in which they bring these characters in is really clever. Because part of me had honestly wondered, I don't think I ever vocalized this, but part of me had wondered after seeing the trailer where Doc Ock showed up and they hinted at the Green Goblin, I had wondered, like, okay, if we're breaking the multiverse open, why is it just Spider-Man stuff coming through? Well, now we know why. Because it's tied to the spell. And the way that Peter's attempts to fine-tune it in mid-cast, affects the spell. Everyone who knows Peter Parker was Spider-Man prior to, the big reveal by the dailybugle.net, they were supposed to be accepted from the spell. And it ended up crossing dimensions. So everyone who knew elsewhere also got pulled in. And not everyone. They did establish not everyone. Because that would mean that the Rosemary Harris version of Aunt May should be here. And the Kirsten Dunst version of Mary Jane should be here. So it's not absolutely everybody. But, and that does get covered. But Dr. Strange saying, like, I stopped some of it, but some of them got through. And it's a reminder that Spidey got found out and unmasked like a lot in his movies over the years. Like, has there been a single Spider-Man movie where he doesn't get unmasked or found out by the villains? I'm not sure there has been. At some point. But that means that all these villains from these various films show up. And I like how they address sort of the timing, that it's the point at which they were about to be defeated. And in most cases, basically everybody except Sandman die. So that was cool. We get a little bit of very hand-wavy stuff to explain why Electro looks different. I'm totally fine with that. I actually kind of hated the, nerdy bucktooth comb over Max Dillon thing that they did in Amazing Spider-Man 2. I was like I'm going to ramble. A tiny touch that I loved. When Electro first showed up and he starts using his lightning powers, the dubstep kicked in. I know a lot of people thought that the dubstep for Electro in Amazing Spider-Man 2 was stupid. I actually really liked it. I thought that was cool. Like ridiculous. It's like kind of dumb, but kind of cool. So I like that came back. Totally fine with that redesign. Here's one of the funny things about sort of the premise of what they're trying to do to solve this. Well, God, I'm going to be all over the place. There's a lot that goes on in this movie, okay? And I'm going to miss stuff. That's the other thing. Don't write in the comments, why don't you talk about this? Because there's a lot to talk about. And I missed it. That's why. So I like that this Peter really does get hung up on the idea of, wait, we're going to send them back and they're just going to die. I love that he's not just okay with that. And that it is, well, not just his aunt, but heavily his aunt, but also MJ being like, that's not who you are. You don't just send people off when you know they're going to die. And that's not who he is. So I love that as a motivator for him initially. I was initially a little bit iffy on the idea of curing the villains because it felt too easy. But then I had to kind of divorce the film versions from, say, like the comic book versions, because if you suddenly are able to cure Norman Osborn or Doc Ock or any of these various people in the comics, it would feel cheap because they've all been around so long that it's like, you didn't do that before. But the thing to remember is pretty much all these villains died in their first appearance. So, and given the fact that they pretty much were all shown to be more or less normal people until something happened, the idea of trying to reverse that to get them something back to closer to a normal, or what their old normal was, actually that does work. Confined to the movies. Like I said, I had to kind of divorce that sort of sense of overarching history that the comics have, where I don't think I would have bought it. But that was an interesting way to go about it. The other Peters, that was nice. That was nice stuff. And I feel like this movie overall is just the right amount of meta. It's pretty dang meta, to be clear. There's a point where poor Andrew Garfield is kind of open, like, you guys are so much cooler than me. I feel like a loser, which, he's the only one who didn't get to do 3 movies, and he always kind of, it always kind of felt like he was a little bit shortchanged. And they're like, no, you're not a loser. And of course, Tobey Maguire saying to him, you're amazing, which was the name of the movies he was in, Amazing Spider-Man. Like any good meta moment, it works even if you don't know the meta context, but it's even better if you do. So, and that's the thing. As much as this is very much a celebration of all the Spider-Man films, both the ones that I love and the ones that I don't, but treating all of them with respect, which is also a very good thing, because while there have been Spider-Man movies I did not particularly like, they didn't deserve to just be kicked around because somebody likes them. And there's no reason to just, act like that was crap. The way this was handled was really good, including a little bit of everything, giving little acknowledgments that, yeah, that's a little silly, this is a little silly, that's a little but not treating any one of these other Spider-Man or these other villains or these other franchises like they're unworthy of the name Spider-Man. So I liked that, thought that was handled really well. Here's the funny thing. I got choked up a little with Aunt May. I didn't quite get there though. You know what part did make me cry though? When the Amazing Spider-Man, when Andrew Garfield rescued MJ. And they didn't have to say it. They didn't have to say that it was closure or at least some kind of catharsis for the fact that he couldn't save Gwen. But man, did he sell it. Whew. Oh, it was really good. And the action scenes are so good. The mirror universe stuff with Doctor Strange and Spider-Man was so good. It's just a real good movie. I got a couple of caveats, though. I don't have anything that I think falls on its face, just a couple of things that I personally am a little bit on. The first is Aunt May dying. I get it. Part of why they did it has to do with how the thing overall ends, because if everyone is going to forget Peter, the idea of having Aunt May forget Peter, that just doesn't compute and feels cruel. He was her family, and you're going to have her forget her family. That would have seemed cruel, both to Peter and to her. But, the way to avoid that is to just have her die. And they try and make her into this version of Uncle Ben, which is weird because we do have an implied existing version of Uncle Ben. It just never really got addressed in the same way, which in and of itself is fine. And I was fine with her saying the line, with great power comes great responsibility. I'm just iffy on the fact that she died. Again, logistically, for the sake of the narrative, I get why. But as a moment unto itself, it just didn't sit right. I just found myself thinking, this Peter has been Spider-Man long enough that the idea of, having the loved one die with those words hanging on after they're gone, this Spider-Man doesn't feel like he needs it. The other Spider-Man did because, they were early into what they were doing. They needed that hard jolt. And I'm not sure he needs it. I mean, he needs the words for sure. I'm not sure he needs her dying. It's one of those cases where like I just feel like it wasn't necessary to kill her. Injure her? Sure. Heck, have her on life support in the hospital. I would buy that this Peter would still nearly beat Norman to death because of that. But I just don't know if it was necessary to kill her, other than the, avoiding the issue of erasing Peter from everybody's memory thing, which would be the purely plot mechanics reason to get her. And I still don't like that. And part of the reason is that I'm iffy on the whole with the resolution and the everybody forgets Peter. I will say that it's one of those things where I'm not sure I like it as a premise, and I'm not sure it's a great idea, but it's pretty well done for an idea that I don't think is all that great. I think the scene of him at the cafe or the donut shop or whatever the heck it is where MJ works that Peter had later on actually did a lot to sort of make me more okay with this resolution overall, because it became less about giving the audience hope that Peter would rekindle these relationships, and it became more about telling Peter they're okay. You don't have to worry. And so that Peter can, figure out his next move at whatever pace he needs to do that. So it did work decently, but there's just, I don't know. Again, from a purely thematic and plot mechanic stance, I get it. Like if you were to show it on a bullet point, Peter's original sin, as far as this film is concerned, is thinking he could have it all, and not being prepared to accept the consequences of what's gone on around him. Now, granted, his unmasking wasn't his decision; those were consequences thrust upon him, but it was still a consequence of him being Spider-Man. So that, and then he gets offered this chance out, but it's not quite what he wanted. He tries to fine-tune it, makes things worse. So I get, again, thematically, the idea that his sin was selfishly trying to have everything just right, and that the resolution for that is for him to just let go and accept the full, and at this point, worse consequences of the situation he created. I get it. I still just don't really like it. I don't know. It's hard for me to completely nail down why this doesn't quite ring right for me. Again, it's not awful. It hardly sinks the movie. It doesn't kill the whole thing, but like I'm just left going, it just feels overblown, I guess, as far as a grand sacrifice without killing the character goes, so that it can still feel like, oh, this is the end of a story, but hey, if the contract negotiations work out, we could still bring him back. I don't know. It felt like a weird middle ground of trying to be the end of a story, but like I while it managed to get a slightly more hopeful note towards the end, I'm like, why can't he be happy? Like, within the narrative of this film, I get he has to pay for the mistake he made, but like, over the course of these 3 films, like, dude's been through enough. He didn't exist for 5 years, and he's been through enough besides. Why can't he be happy? I don't know. And granted, that's partly a Peter Parker thing and a Spider-Man thing. Things never go well for him, but that's actually one of the reasons why, as much as I love Spider-Man, it's hard for me to read Spider-Man long-term, because eventually everything always goes to crap for him. And, case in point, I suppose. I suppose the only other things really to talk about, I mean, unless I'm just going to start cataloging scenes that were good, like Ned had a lot of really good scenes, especially talking with the other Peters. Like, Ned was consistently really funny. MJ was consistently really charming. Both the other Peters were good. And I actually liked Tobey Maguire as Peter more here than I think I ever did in any of the other Spider-Man movies. And I don't even think he's bad. He's just my least favorite Spider-Man out of the ones we've had so far. But he worked better for me here than he had previously. Something about a little bit of the age. He wears it well. That I like the meta moment and complaining about his back, which was a problem Tobey Maguire actually had in playing the part. It's just, it's good. Lots and lots of good stuff. So I suppose I should talk about the well, I guess the mid credits and the post credits. So the mid credits is the stuff with Venom, which okay, can we like it is very strange how they have decided to integrate Venom into the main MCU, which is as a mid credit in Venom's second movie, have him blip into well, I shouldn't say blip because that means something else in the MCU. Have him shift into the MCU, and which they cover with the mid credits here, which technically by the rules of how that spell worked, he shouldn't have, unless like the spell misidentified which Venom it pulled over, and it was trying to pull the Spider-Man 3 Venom over and ended up getting this one. Maybe that's a headcanon stretch, but and then he gets blipped back, but the little bit of the symbiote gets left behind. So now we have the symbiote in the MCU, so he can now do Venom here, which I'll honestly be a little bit surprised if they do that. Like, here's what I'll say. Like, if they can get Tom Holland back for more Spider-Man movies, they'll definitely do a Venom in a Spider-Man movie and then maybe in the MCU. But the thing to remember is Sony and Marvel they have shared custody of Spider-Man right now. Kind of. Sony sells the film rights, but they have negotiated this sort of dual usage of the character thing. And right now, Sony is controlling Venom pretty much entirely on their own. It would be very strange for them to sign off on the creation of a completely different version of Venom, especially given that the one they've already got is doing so well for them at the box office. I don't know. It was like kind of cool. They're like, oh, so they can now do Venom in the MCU. And I'm like, wait, are we really going to simultaneously have two Venom? I'm not even saying that as like it's a too confusing thing, because clearly multiverses are in now. So claiming the multiverse is too confusing, evidently that turned out not to be a valid concern. So, but then the bigger thing is we had the teaser for Doctor Strange, the Multiverse of Madness. It looks interesting. It is good that they're bringing Mordo back because I hadn't seen him or heard mention of him anywhere else. So I'm glad he's coming back. It would have felt like a waste of a really good actor. Otherwise, we saw Wanda. I'm not super thrilled that it basically looks like the ultra evil version of Doctor Strange from What If is going to be brought over and possibly be the villain, or at least be an impetus for some of the stuff going on. I don't love that because unlike, I guess, seemingly everybody, I didn't like that episode of What If. That said, I'll still be curious to see what they do with it. Like, here's the thing. At this point, we have a pattern of these really big ideas that should be too complicated to work, actually working. Because, you know, when it was just Into the Spider-Verse, that could have been a fluke. Then there was Endgame, which a little bit of a different beast, but huge, massive. Should have been too big to pull off, too big to be satisfying. Yet it was. All right, twice. That's a trend, I suppose. And now this, also so big and so complicated and pulling in so much stuff that it shouldn't work, yet it does. That's a pattern. That is a pattern of the Marvel-related films, and I mean, technically Spider-Verse is kind of its own beast right now, but for these things to pull off this scope and this scale, it's something I honestly didn't think I'd see. It was something I wasn't sure I wanted to see. But they took the time to earn it, to build to this. And now that we're here, it is working. Spider-Man, No Way Home. What did you think about it? Whatever your thoughts are, drop something down in the comments. Let's talk about it. Hey, After this, why not consider heading over to the Council of Geeks YouTube channel, where later today I'm going to be putting up my ranking of the order of all 9 theatrically released Spider-Man films. So maybe consider checking that out. You can support me on my Patreon. That'd be greatly appreciated. There's also a link for that down in the description, plus links for other stuff like books I've written and social media things and my P.O. box. Hey, why not? But no pressure on any of it. Take a relaxed attitude around here, so you can just come on back next time you need a break. None of this would have been possible without my supporters over on Patreon. In particular, I want to thank Robin Powell, Raven McBain, Tracy Scrabbit, Vincent Paul Bartolucci, Robin Moore, and Shayla Gourlay. If you'd like to hear me possibly mispronounce your name, maybe consider looking at the reward tiers over on the Patreon. But either way, don't worry about it too much. Take care of yourself.